grateful to our Vice Chancellor for giving us this opportunity to organize this webinar today. And our speaker today is Professor Tarun Chordia, a professor in finance. Chordia. I was actually,
it is Lapi, it is called Cardia.
Chordia. Actually, I was like, I looked up in YouTube how to pronounce that yesterday.
But you can
no,
say
it is
better
Chordia because it's a proper noun. You can pronounce it anyway.
Chordia. All right, Chordia. A professor in finance. Thank you, sir. A professor in finance from Goizeta Business School, Emory University, USA. He did his studies in IIT Delhi and Tulane University, New Orleans, and was awarded his PhD in the year 1993 in finance. He had received more than 20 awards, honors, and grants, and 40 publications in referred journals, number of articles in other reputed journals, conference proceedings, and books. He is also involved in many professional activities. Today, Mizoram University is very fortunate to have him as a speaker. So before I invite our speaker, I would like to inform all the participants that you can drop in questions in the Q&A box. All participants can drop in questions in the Q&A box, which will be taken up later by Professor Giribabu M, the other organizing secretary. All right. So with that brief opening remark, may I invite Professor Tarun Chordia to deliberate upon economics research. The platform is yours, sir.
Thank you, Lali. And thanks for this opportunity. It's great to meet everybody. I was actually in India about a month ago and in Rajasthan, and things were really, really bad. And things have been getting worse. Both my parents and my in-laws were ill. My in-laws spent a month in the hospital. So it's good to hear that Mizoram is doing something right in India. Some part of India is doing something right. But anyway, glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. And I'm going to talk about economics research. The idea I'm coming from, so we have a PhD program at Emory University, and there are lots of PhD programs in the US in finance and economics and very many different areas. And we are not seeing many students from India joining these PhD programs. So if I can garner some interest in people, if I can generate some enthusiasm for PhD programs, that would be great with this talk. So we're seeing a lot of students from lots of different countries, but not India for some reason. So I want to try and promote idea of doing economics research. And this is, I think, can be a very interesting path to a career. So let's talk about economics. What is economics? And there are a whole bunch of different definitions that I came across. So let's talk about a number of definitions here. It's a social science. It's unlike the hard sciences. So what do I mean by hard sciences? Hard sciences like physics, like chemistry, right? Astrophysics. These are the hard sciences where you can do experiments. Now, social science, you're looking at data that's coming about being generated in a regular fashion, right? It's concerned with the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services, right? Everybody, all of us are economic actors. We participate in the economy. We are involved in consumption or production or distribution somewhere or the other. We are all involved in this. So it's another way to think about it is it's a study of mankind. It's a study of everything in the ordinary business of life. Because in your ordinary business of life, you are involved in consumption, production, in interactions. Everything is just basic life. You're just studying basic life. So study of human behavior as a relationship between given ends and scarce means and incentives that drive behavior. Right? Keep in mind, people have goals. They want to buy a car, let's say, and then you have to save money. Money is scarce. And what are the incentives that drive behavior? That's what economics studies. It's a study of marginal impacts and welfare, right? So what kind of policy implications government actions will have? What kind of welfare will happen? What kind of market conditions will improve welfare? Right? And what are the marginal impacts? So a lot of people will say economics is a study of the margins, right? If you buy this one extra product, or if you produce this one extra product, What impact does it have? So you study the margins to get an idea of what is the like the marginal tax rate, right? So what kind of an impact would it have on behavior for people to work and earn and pay taxes? So it's a study of marginal impacts. You have to be aware of that. And it's a decision making under scarcity of resources. Time and money is always scarce, and you have to make decisions under scarcity of resources and uncertainty. Right? You don't know what the future is going to bring. You're trying to make the best decision at this point in time. And every economic agent, all of us, and companies and governments, and everybody's trying to make decisions with uncertainty, with scarcity of resources. And somehow through this combined decision making of everybody in the economy, somehow we are seeing equilibrium come out. Some outcome happens, and that's what economics is studying. You want to understand historical trends and make predictions because you want to know what's going to happen in the future and how should you react, right? And for that, you look at historical data. In finance, we look at stock market data, we look at bond markets, we look at derivative markets. So we try and understand what's happened, what economic behavior drives prices, and try and understand what's going to happen in the future. The efficient and optimal allocation of scarce resources, right? This is actually very, very important. Now let's think about why the efficient and optimal allocation of scarce resources is important. Because if you waste resources, the standard of living goes down. So think about how different kinds of economies allocate scarce resources. So in a capitalist society, in a democratic capitalist society, the way we allocate resources is through the mechanism of price, through supply and demand, right? If the demand for onions goes up, the price of onions goes up, and then farmers plant more onions to supply to the market, right? Similarly, as the demand for cars goes up, there are more cars manufactured, the price goes up, more cars are manufactured, and they supply the market. Now, look at this system, capitalist system versus what was happening in the Soviet Union. There was a bureaucrat who would decide this is how much we're going to produce, and this is what we're going to supply to the market at this price. And of course, we know what happened to the Soviet Union. That system does not work, right? So how you organize society, how do you organize your systems, your economic systems, so that you have efficient and optimal allocation of scarce resources? And this is important because this has an impact on the standard of living of everybody, right? And as a society, that's what we want. We want to improve our standard of living. Okay, so lots of definitions here of economics, but just think of it as scarce resources you want to allocate efficiently. It's a study of economic behavior of everybody who's there in the economy, and we're trying to come up with an equilibrium to this very different actions of very many different people. That's economics, and it's about daily life. Okay, there are lots of different fields in economics, and I'm going to list them here, and then we'll go into a little bit of detail in all of them. So microeconomics, macroeconomics, econometrics, development economics, behavioral economics, labor economics, health economics, environmental economics, international economics, and financial economics. So my research is in financial economics, but let's go through each of these, and I'll try and give you a broad idea of what each of these entail, right? So that if you get interested in research, you can pick and choose where you want to go and what you want to do. Okay, let's talk about microeconomics. So what is microeconomics? It considers questions that people face every day, right? Individual choices of where to live and work, right? How do you decide to live in this place, and what job you're going to do, and what area you're going to work on, right? How much to save and what to buy, right? How much do you spend today? How much you save for the future, right? What are you saving for? Your retirement, your children's education. lots and lots of different reasons to save, and that important reasons why you want to consume today, right? And how much do you do that? Again, just decisions that people face every day. Companies' decisions about location, hiring, firing, and investment. Interaction of decisions in markets and other institutions, right? Institutions are very important. And I'll talk a little bit about this. So economic agents, consumers, right? Consumers are demand function, right? We want to consume. We demand so much food every month. We demand so much electricity. We demand so much water supply, right? So all of us have demand functions, and we have budgets, right? You earn money and you have budgets in which you got to have your demand functions. There are opportunity costs, right? If you're doing something, that means you're not doing something else, right? We got to, as economists, we got to think about opportunity cost when we are trying to come up with equilibrium solutions. Sunk cost, right? What's happened? Risk. Again, risk is important. You are investing, there's risk. You have to be worried about risk, right? The insurance market is all about managing risk, about sharing of risk, right? So one thing about the insurance market, insurance market doesn't make risk go away, right? It just pools risk so that the insurance company has an idea statistically of how much the aggregate risk is, and they can price it accordingly. So it doesn't make it go away. It just shares risk. Think about it. If you are buying, let's say, a house, and your house gets burned down and destroyed in a flood, that's a huge loss to you. But if everybody in the town gets together and makes a pool of money, saying, okay, if somebody's house gets destroyed, we will pool our money and we'll rebuild, right? So that is what risk sharing is, and risk is a very big part of the economy. Intertemporal consumption, right? How much do you consume today? How much do you consume in the future, right? There are these models of intertemporal consumption that tell you what's the impact on asset prices. Producers, right? Producers have supply curves, right? How much of the goods to produce, at what cost, and what is the pricing that you put on it, right? So a car manufacturer has so many different people who are involved in manufacturing, so many different suppliers, right? You put together a product that costs a lot of money, and now we're going to price it. We want to price it in a competitive market, hopefully, and that's going to tell us what is the quantity produced, how much is going to be sold, and so on. Boundaries of the firms and organizations. Again, these are important questions. Why are some firms large? Why are some firms small? Right? Why are firms, conglomerates, large in India and less so in the US? Right? So what decides the boundaries of the firm? So Coase, Ronald Coase, again, he's a Nobel laureate. His story was firms want to minimize transaction costs, right? Think about it. If a firm contracts with another firm for supply of something, you got to write all the different possible contingent claims that can happen, right? If the firm supplies late, or if the supply is damaged a little bit. So all these different things have to be negotiated and put down in a legal framework. Now that is a transaction cost. And what Coase was saying is, if you bring it within the firm, the transaction costs are lower. So that tells you about how the boundaries of the firms are decided. So in many developing countries, because a lot of the activity is about managing government, I would say government interference, the conglomerates start to exist because they become good at managing government relations, right? So there is a transaction cost related to governments, which increase the boundary of the firm in many developing countries. In many developed countries, the boundaries of the firm are narrower, right? Firms specialize, and then they contract out a lot of stuff. So again, there are lots of important considerations as consumers, as producers. Markets are important, right? Consumers and the suppliers meet, and there's price clearing. Now, what kind of markets are these? Are these monopolies? A monopolist will not produce enough to supply the market because they want to keep prices high. Competition. So as a general rule, as economists, we like competition. We want competition to be there because the competition provides optimal allocation to buyers, to consumers, right? But there are market failures, right? There are externalities, there are information, there are collective goods, right? So externalities, for example, pollution is an externality. A company pollutes, but it's not taking into account the pollution that it's causing in its production, in its pricing process, right? So there have to be regulations. There can be positive externalities, information, right? We may have information differences. So for example, if I try to buy a car from a used car salesman, I don't know the quality of the car. The salesman knows the quality of the car, right? So there is information difference, and that can have an impact on markets. Collective goods, right? For example, there is this famous tragedy of the commons. In the high seas, people have an incentive to just fish extensively, because if I'm a fisherman, I want to get as much fish as I can. And other fishermen are also trying to do the same thing. But this destroys the fish stocks, right? So this is the tragedy of commerce. This is another failure of the market, right? Collective goods. So there are lots of market failures. And as economists, we have to understand this, and we have to try and make regulations that will protect the consumers, that will protect the economy. Institutions are very important, right? So how do you allocate property rights, right? So once you allocate property rights properly, then negotiations can work to improve allocation efficiency. Market design, right? For example, who should interact and in what order, and what is the regulation that's governing market design? Culture of an economy and trust in an economy. So it has been shown that high trust economies have higher GDP growth. They are richer than low trust economies. So how do you foster trust? And is it something that is inherent to a society, or is it something that can be improved, that can be generated, right? Again, important questions. This is microeconomics. Let's talk about macroeconomics. This studies the behavior and performance of an economy in the aggregate, right? Unemployment. What is the level of unemployment in a society? What is GDP growth? Let's talk about recessions, depressions, boom and bust, right? How do you moderate the business cycle? What policy should have? Like if you go back to Keynes, he was saying, well, the government should have fiscal expenses to moderate the economic cycle. The monetary policy became important, right? Right now we are back talking about monetary and fiscal policy. Inflation, right? The price shocks, the great oil price shocks in the 1970s, right? It caused inflation. The price of gold, real estate, these things go up whenever there's inflation. But why is there inflation? Because typically what happens is governments, they spend a lot of money, they have huge deficits, and they finance these deficits by printing money. But printing money is a tax on the citizens, and it's a tax that the citizens did not agree to. It's a hidden tax, right? So inflation can have bad consequences in terms of distribution of taxes across different groups, and it can distort the allocation of resources. So you have to be very careful. So in the US, the central bank, it's known as the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is an independent organization. And by making it independent, the central government is not allowed to print money. It's the central bank does the printing of the money. So there are these institutions you put in place to control this tendency of governments to inflate away the debt. So monetary policy, again, we have central banks, RBI in India, the Federal Reserve in the US, money supply, right? Interest rates, banking, deposit insurance and regulation. There are all these different tasks that a central bank does. Nowadays, they're talking about digital currencies, right? In the US, they are already, the Federal Reserve is running a research program to study digital currency, so that instead of us having an account with a bank, we can have an account directly with the central bank, right? That will reduce transaction costs. But again, should the central bank be in this business? There are lots of questions around this, interesting questions to research on. Exchange rates. Again, if you fix your monetary policy, that means if you fix interest rates, if you fix your fiscal policy, how much the government spends, your deficits and so on, your inflation targets and so on. And if your current account is convertible, that means if money can move freely in and out of the country, you cannot fix exchange rates. Exchange rate has to be variable. So there are these, what we know over time in macroeconomics is that you can fix either the monetary policy, which is interest rates, and your fiscal policy or inflation rates, and whether your exchange rates, and whether your economy has free movement of money in and out of the country. Right? You cannot fix all of them. One of them has to be variable. Consumption and savings, again, at the level of the country. Production, balance of payment. So if a country consumes more than it produces, well, you will have a deficit. You have to import. You import more, that means you'll have a balance of payment problem. Somehow it has to be financed through borrowing, through remittances, through something, right? Capital flows, again, important. Trade imbalances. See, I know India has a huge trade imbalance because oil is a big part of consumption in India. So you have to think about how you manage, because to be able to buy oil, you have to produce other things to sell, right? So consumption and savings, again, huge part of the economy. Growth rates. Can you implement policies to increase the growth rate in the economy so that the standard of living goes up, right? So again, these are the things that macroeconomists think about. Let's talk about econometrics. It uses economic theory, mathematics, and statistical inference to quantify economic phenomenon, right? So statistical and mathematical analysis of economic relationships, right? This is different from just pure statistics, where you're not bringing in economic theory or economic relationships. It's a tool to inform public policy debates and make business decisions and forecast future events, used by businesses in decisions on pricing, inventory, production, and used to test theories, as we say, confront theory with the data, right? Hypothesis testing, right? You might have a hypothesis that you want to test. Well, you got to go look at the data and test this. You got to be aware of statistical distributions. You got to be aware of the power and the size of tests, right? We talk about type 1 and type 2 errors. Type 1, when you falsely reject the null. Type 2, when you do not reject a null that should be rejected, right? So again, there are very specific methodologies that we have to test theories. And what we have seen over time in econometrics is that we are using more and more sophisticated statistical and mathematical techniques. And the reason we do this is because we only have one time series of data. There's only one lifespan, right? We can study the data, one set of data over time. This is very much unlike the hard sciences, like physics. You can run experiments over and over again to improve your statistical significance. With the social sciences, with economics, we don't have the luxury of running experiments over and over again. Although I'll talk about a case where they actually run experiments, but it's hard to run experiments. So we're just studying the data that we have. And that's one time series of data. So we have to use really sophisticated techniques. And that's what's happening with econometrics. And there are so many techniques out there that have been developed over time, right? There's RDD, there's diff and diff, there's identification, there's lots and lots of stuff that we have been doing over time. Again, you spend time in a PhD program, you learn all of this. Development economics, it focuses on improving fiscal, economic, and social conditions in developing economies, in emerging economies. So health, education, working conditions, fiscal and monetary policy, markets, development aid, right? All of this is what development economics talks about. So you might be aware of this Millennium Development Goals. And now the list of goals has expanded quite a bit. But let me just list these Millennium Development Goals. Eradicate extreme poverty, right? In India, in parts of Africa, there's extreme poverty. And of course, very important to eradicate this extreme poverty and hunger. Universal primary education, gender equality and empowering women, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, environmental sustainability, global partnership for development, right? So these are development goals that a lot of countries have set with along with the UN. And all of these make sense, right? We should be trying to do this regardless of whether the UN tells us or anybody tells us. And a lot of important people have been working in development economics. Amartya Sen, right? He looked at the Bengal famine, if you remember. And the main contribution of his work was, look, in democracies, people do not die of famine. It's in dictatorships that people die of famine. Because in the Bengal famine, it turned out there was a lot of food. It was just not being distributed because the English at that time, they were ruling India and they didn't care about the people, right? So democracies are different. In more recent years, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, both of them got a Nobel Prize. And their idea was looking at doing these randomized experiments in the development economics field, right? So they will do an experiment whether it makes sense to give money to a family or give a cow to a family to try and sustain them, or give a micro loan or give a grant. So they actually ran these experiments to answer these questions. And there are a lot of people working in development economics with randomized experiments. So this is one area in economics where randomized experiments have been used and have been used quite well. So yeah, and both of them got a Nobel Prize not too long ago. Okay, so let's talk about why countries might be rich or poor. So I have this first column about rich countries, and this is poor countries. So if you look at the population of poor countries is obviously larger. GDP per capita about $30,000 a year or $2,000 a year. Human Development Index high in the rich countries, low in the poor countries. Annual population growth is higher in the poorer countries. Annual growth of GDP per capita 1966 to 2004 is actually higher in the richer countries. Total fertility rate, it's higher in the poorer countries. Adult literacy, right? This may be one of the big drivers of poverty. Adult literacy is much lower in the poorer countries than in richer countries, right? Index of government corruption, right? This has a big impact on economies, right? So if the government corruption is high, that's going to deter economic activity. Life expectancy at birth is lower in the poorer countries. The mortality rate, look at that difference, right? Huge. All this data comes from World Bank in 2005, the World Development Indicators. Life expectancy at birth, rural population, much higher. Agriculture share of GDP, right? And if you look at the population involved in agriculture, much higher in poorer countries than in rich countries, right? So now we're talking about the knowledge economy and the creator economy. And if most of your population is involved in agriculture, you're not participating in this new forms of the world economy, which is happening all over the world. So things to think about. How can we change these, right? Things that we can have an impact on is index of government corruption and health, right? Child mortality, health. These things can be addressed and should be addressed, right? So the growth rate in GDP, if a poor country cannot grow faster, there's some impediments that are holding it back, right? Can we handle the structural impediments to growth, right? We've got to think about these things. So behavioral economics, psychological, cognitive, emotional, cultural, and social factors that drive decisions, right? It's just not utility maximizing. Individuals are not rational utility maximizing economic agents, because a lot of different things impact our behavior. There are behavioral biases, right? Overconfidence. Everybody believes that they are above average. Well, that's a very well known. And there are lots of surveys that have been taken. Everybody believes that they are better drivers than everybody else, right? Again, it cannot be true. Self-attribution, right? If anything goes well, you attribute it to yourself. Loss aversion. You take actions to avoid loss. Framing, right? Your decisions are framed in a certain framework, right? So you might have allocate some money to paying your bills and some money to spending on fun product, and then even if you might borrow to spend on a vacation, even though you might have money in the bank, because you're framing it as a vacation which you can borrow and pay off, right? So there are different framing or anchoring. You might anchor on past, let's say past prices. If in the past the price of something you wanted to buy was lower than now, you might anchor on it, right? Confirming bias. If something goes well, you confirm that it was because of you. Affect heuristic. You rely on emotions to make quick decisions. Ambiguity aversion. People don't like ambiguity. They like certainty, right? So you avoid situations where there's ambiguity. Bounded rationality, right? You don't try to optimize over the whole space. You just, if you find something that's good enough, okay, you go with it. Commitment bias. You ignore data that conflicts with your beliefs. Choice overload. If there's too many choices, you walk into a shop, it is confusing. Disposition bias, right? If you bought a stock or you bought something and the price went down, you don't want to sell it. You want to hold on until it comes back up. That's a bias. It's very well documented. Endowment effect, right? If you are given something, you may hold on to it even though the value of it may be lower than what the market is offering. Gambler's fallacy, right? If I toss 5 coins in a row and they turn out to be heads, most people will expect the next toss to give me tails because, well, it should revert. But no, each toss has a 50% probability of having heads or tails. Optimism, pessimism bias, right? People are optimistic or pessimistic. Representativeness, right? You observe something and you think it's representative of the economy. Not necessarily, right? So these biases have been documented. So if you look at classical economics, we start with individual agents, like economic agents, as rational utility maximizing individuals, right? But that's not necessarily true. The new branch of economics is talking about, okay, let's think about all these psychological, cognitive issues that might drive behavior, right? Again, there's a huge literature in this. And in fact, a few years ago, there are 2 people who got a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics. Labor economics. This is the study of the labor force as an element in the process of production, right? Employees, employers, self-employed, unemployed, right? Patterns of income, employment, and wages. Labor income is the major source of income for most households, right? We know that. NAIRU, this is the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, right? How low can unemployment go before inflation picks up? So wage growth, these are the questions that are now being asked. Inequality, right? So why is there so much inequality in wages, like a CEO versus a worker, right? What can we do to reduce this inequality? Is it due to discrimination, right? Should we promote diversity? How should we promote diversity? How do we increase the labor force participation? Right? There are a lot of people who don't participate in the labor force. What incentives do we provide people? What incentives, is it monetary incentives that make people work? Are there titles that make people work? What drives people to work? So in the US with COVID, there's a lot of money being distributed to people. The payroll protection program, a lot of grants being given to people, to companies. And now we are seeing that because a lot of these unemployment benefits, increased unemployment benefits, companies are not able to find workers. Is it because there's so much money being given to people? Right? This is the research that one can do. And people are talking about this impact of the payroll protection program on stock prices, on incentives of people to work, right? These are, again, important questions, policy questions that labor economics talk about. Okay, health economics. Analysis of cost, benefits, management, and consequences of health and healthcare. Application of economic theory to the phenomenon associated with health and healthcare. Allocation of doctors, nurses, other medical professionals to deliver efficient, cost-effective services. Right? For example, governments don't plan for the demand for health services during COVID. That's not something you plan for. But suddenly the requirements have increased so much, the demand for healthcare has increased, that many countries have seen shortages of oxygen, of ventilators, of doctors and nurses, of other medical professionals, right? So how do you allocate this? How do you, as a society, should you have a private medical system? Should you have a public medical system? Should it be a combination of the two? What kind of insurance, health insurance do you provide? Should it be a universal health insurance? Should people be asked to buy health insurance? So there are lots and lots of important questions here. Funding for drug research and pricing, right? Should you waive the patent for drugs? For example, COVID vaccine, right? That's an important question, because should we waive patents for all drugs? The reason patents are given is to incentivize companies to spend money on research to come up with new medicines, which they can exploit for 20 years. So that's the idea behind patents. So if you remove patent protection, will it be the case that new medicines will not be discovered, at least at the same rate as if there was patent protection, right? And how do we value that? What is the loss function, right? These are the things we need to think about. And in terms of GDP, healthcare, the health sector, is a very large fraction of the GDP. In the US, it's 18% of GDP is healthcare. In Switzerland, it's 12%. Germany, France, Sweden, Japan, and Canada, it's 11%. UK, it's 10%. In India, it's 3.6%. Right? Should India be spending more on healthcare? And where is that money going to come from? Right? Remember, economics is making choices of these scarce resources. Right? If you allocate money to healthcare, maybe you have to get it from, let's say, research on agriculture, or you have to get it from somewhere, right? How do you allocate money, and what is the optimal way of allocating money? These are the questions you got to think about, right? How much should you spend on healthcare? In US, there was a survey done, and people are willing to spend $6 million on healthcare over the lifetime, right? $6 million per person. That's a lot of money. Where is this money going to come from? This is what people are willing to spend, but are they willing to pay taxes to support this? They're willing to pay more to develop drugs. They're willing to pay more for drugs, but where is this money going to come from? Right? Now, most of the money, it turns out, in healthcare in the US is spent in the last 6 weeks of a person's life. Right? Lots of money is spent in the US. Should there be rationing in the last, at a certain point? Right? These are important policy questions you got to think about, right? And health economists think about this. Environmental economics. This is the relation between economics and the environment. Exploitation and use of natural resources and waste products. Climate change policy, nuclear power, recycling, traffic congestion, carbon emission pricing, sustainability regulation, reforestation, taxes and subsidies, right? Again, important policy questions. Right? How do you manage this carbon problem that we have. Should there be carbon pricing? Should there be a carbon tax? Right? You have to think about cost benefit analysis. You're thinking of building a dam, pipelines, etc. You got to think about the cost and benefits of that dam, cost and benefits of the oil pipeline. Right? What if there's a leakage? What path is it going to take? Is it going to pollute? Right? Lots of different decisions which regulators have to think about. How do we handle carbon emission? Is geoengineering the way to go? Is that cheaper to do? Or should there be a carbon tax? Actually, most economists will tell you it's better to have a carbon tax than carbon emission pricing. Unfortunately, politically, it's not happened yet. It's very hard to do. The Paris Accords, right? This involves payments to developing economies, right? But how much should that payment be? Where should that payment be directed? To protecting forests, to undertake measures to reduce pollution? How should this be organized? A lot of firms are now talking about ESG policy, right? Social governance, emission. All firms are beginning to get involved with this. Environmental, social, and governance policies, ESG. But you got to be careful about what these firms are doing. A lot of it, they just talk. It's not clear that they're actually doing anything. Okay, international economics, effect on economic activity from international differences in productive resources and consumer preferences. Right? Most economists, most of us disagree on a lot of things, but we mostly agree on one thing, that trade is good. Right? Having trade allows you to specialize. This comes from the theory of comparative advantage. David Ricardo did this a long time ago, 1800 something. Right? So the idea is, if a country like, let's say the US, it's good at growing wheat. A country like Japan is good at manufacturing cars. So US should grow wheat, Japan should grow cars, and they should trade, and everybody is better off. Right? And the key is that US is better at growing wheat compared to building cars, and Japan is better at building cars compared to growing wheat. Right? That's where the benefits of trade come in. That's the comparative advantage. Again, we can work through a numerical example to show how this works. But trade is good. World trade is good. International trade raises living standards, provides employment, provides a greater variety of consumer products. And international competition brings best practices and improves efficiency. So the recent trends that have been globalization, trade deficits, balance of payments, currency manipulation, unfair trade practices, and dumping. Like, these are a lot of research questions that people are thinking about right now. We have institutions to promote trade. GATT was the old institution, but it dealt mainly with goods. The World Trade Organization, this is a new institution. It has impact. It is involved with goods, services, and intellectual property. You have the IMF, which handles the balance of payments. So there are institutions in place. The big question is, lots of countries impose trade barriers and tariffs. Is that good? I actually have been wondering about this for a long time. And since I don't work in international economics, I've not actually done work on this. So does unilateral reduction in tariffs help? So if a country decides, look, yeah, let me just eliminate all tariffs and improve the standard of living, is that a viable option? Or will the industry in my country be destroyed with imports coming in? So again, I don't know the answer to this, but this is an interesting question. Financial economics. So like I said, this is where I work. There are different aspects to financial economics. Corporate finance. This is firm level resource generation and allocation, where you think about things like dividend policy, capital structure, investment, financing decisions, agency, right? A lot of people have won Nobel Prizes working in this areas. You want to maximize firm value. That's what corporate finance deals with. But this is what Milton Friedman talks about. The only goal of a firm's manager is to maximize firm value. recently people have been thinking about, okay, it's not just shareholders who care about firm value, but a firm manager should care about creditors, about employees, about customers, about government. There are lots of different stakeholders. Another area, and market microstructure, this is where I work on. So design of markets, right? How should you set the bid-ask spreads, the tick size, short sales, and price time priority rules, transparency, right? The idea is to be able to facilitate trade, right? And these are the questions that people think about. What trading platform should we have? Over-the-counter markets versus exchanges, a central counterparty, and what are the gains from trade? What are the trading volumes, transaction costs, right? How you design markets is going to have an impact on trading volumes and transaction costs. Demand and supply of liquidity, cost of capital, right? It turns out liquidity has an impact on the cost of capital. High frequency trading, this is the new stuff that's been happening. And what are the welfare implications of high frequency trading? Because trades are now taking place in milliseconds, and trades are being done by computers without human interaction, right? The market is changing very, very fast. So I actually do some work, some research in this area. I worked on bid-ask spreads, on tick size, on trading volumes, transaction costs, on liquidity, cost of capital, and high frequency trading. So I've done some work in this area. I also work in asset pricing. So asset pricing theory is again important, right? We always think of our classical theories are rational, intertemporal, utility maximizing, atomistic investors in frictionless markets with homogeneous information, right? That's what most theories, the classical theories, are written on. And we have these questions that we have, the equity premium puzzle. We have factor models for pricing, risk premiums, the cost of capital, anomalies, right, which don't, that our models don't actually work. We have characteristic premiums because of the anomalies. There are questions of multiple hypothesis testing. Machine learning has become important in this area now. So the topics I've worked on is risk premiums. I worked on anomalies. I worked on multiple hypothesis testing. Right? So a lot of work is going on in this asset pricing also. So economics journals, if you're looking to publish in the top journals, these are the top journals in economics: Quarterly Journal of Economics, American Economic Review, Journal of Political Economy, Econometrica, Review of Economic Studies. And journals in finance that are the top journals are Journal of Finance, Review of Financial Studies, Journal of Financial Economics. So I have published in these journals. I'm not published in economics journals because I'm more of a financial economist, right? So this is where most finance people would publish it. And let me tell you, it's extremely hard to publish in the top journals, right? Each project that you work on takes about 2 years of work before you even submit to a journal. And each of these journals have a 95 or 97% rejection rate. And by the time you get through the process, it might be 5 years. And in the third round, you may get rejected after 5 years. So you have to start all over again. So this process is extremely, extremely hard. And you have to be aware of that. And in academia, it's the publication process, because this is what is moving the science forward, right? This is what informs policy debates, as it brings about new ideas into the cutting edge of research. That's what you want to be at. And it's extremely hard, getting harder. So let me ask you some questions, some basic questions that, let me give you some examples. That's what these questions are about. I want to give you some examples of questions that you might come across in economics. So you have this, you're working as a CEO at a firm, and you had talked to a consulting firm, and you had spent 50 lakhs of rupees on a consulting study. And the consulting study was done to give you some information about this 20 crore project that you want to undertake, right? So you had spent 50 lakhs for this 20 crore project, and now you have to decide whether you take this project or not. So you look at the consulting study, you look at what the recommendations are, and you're studying the recommendations, and now you're trying to decide on the project, right? It's a huge project. Now, how do you account for the cost of the consulting study? Right? So what do you do about the cost of the consulting study? Any thoughts, any ideas? Anybody? So if you put it in the Q&A, somebody, any answers?
Consultancy also is official cost, no? That is what
It is a
actually
cost.
include official cost. So it can be accounted in the project cost only.
Aha. See, that's what many people think about. But see, you're sitting here
I'm a
today.
science man. I'm a science man, but it's my guess.
Yeah. So see, that's the point, because people, you have to study economics to know what you actually ignore this cost, because you're
Yes.
sitting here today, right? That cost has already been incurred. It's a sunk cost. It's gone. It's water under the bridge. When you're sitting here today, now you decide whether you spend 20 crores or not. The 50 lakhs has already been spent. It is gone, right?
Yes.
That should not enter your decision going forward, right? Now, should you spend 20 crores or not is the question.
It is actually the consultancy. Before you take up, if the project is favorably taken, then only the consultancy fees has to be paid. Otherwise, the consultancy fees cannot be paid.
Okay, so that's the other question. So the way I framed it is that consulting study is done, and now you're deciding.
Yes.
But if you're before this, the question whether you should even do the consulting study for this 20 crore project, then you should include it in your cost, right? So you're absolutely right, Sambhavishan. So should you include it in the cost after it's already been spent? No. Right. So let's think about how to account for allocated costs. Right.
Yes.
So typically you have a division that's trying to take on a project. The headquarters will allocate costs. So there are costs that the headquarters have. And if you take on this project will be allocated some cost. So how do you account for allocated costs? Should you account for it?
It is to be accounted. Otherwise, no, it is going to be unaccountable money, and it is going to be. Yes, it should be accounted.
Yeah, see, I'm giving you examples where the answer is counterintuitive. It turns out that you do not account because the cost of the headquarters is going to be there regardless of whether you take on the project or not. You should look only at incremental costs. So whether you take on this project or not, that cost is the headquarter cost is going to be incurred. So it should not show up in your decision whether you take on this project or not. Right. So again, these are
before planning the project, there should be some kind of readiness for this kind of expenditure. Otherwise, one cannot go for this expenditure of consultancy. Before planning the project, you should have some kind of allocation for this kind of expenditure.
No, so before you start suppose you're sitting today and you're thinking that, okay, I'm going to start a project. Then you're trying to decide, okay, should I hire a consultancy or not? And this is what the consultancy will cost, 50 lakhs, and 20 crores is what the project costs. So at this time, you worry about the consultancy cost also. But after you have spent the money on the consulting cost, whether you take on the project or not, it doesn't matter. That's gone, right? That's already been spent. Now,
Yes.
whether you take on the project or not, you cannot change the fact that that 50 lakhs is already gone. Now, the decision to take on the project depends on whether you will get a good return on this 20 crores or not. That is that's the framework. Okay, so now let's think about this. You have bought a piece of land 30 years ago. You can build a mall or a hotel on this piece of land. How do you account for the cost of land? Right? Let's say you bought this land for 5 lakhs of rupees and today it's worth 50 crores. What should be the cost of land you should take in this project? Let's say it's 5 crores, you bought it for 5 lakhs, the land is worth, the market value is 5 crores. What should you do?
You should be taken market value only.
Absolutely. You should always take only the market value.
Yes, yes.
Because that is the opportunity cost. You can sell it for 5 crores.
Yes, sir.
Right? Because if you take it at book value, which is 5
Yes,
lakhs,
sir.
that
Yes,
doesn't
sir.
make sense.
Yes, sir.
Right? Absolutely. Okay. Now suppose you have a hypothesis that childhood exercise reduces adult obesity. So I want to test this hypothesis. How should I test this hypothesis? What data should I look at? What should I study? This is an actual research that somebody did. And I'll tell you how they did it. But the question is, when you think about this question, how should you do this? How should you test this? What is the data you should look at? How should you generate the data? What should you do?
You need to take up a sample survey, sample analysis from the childhood by taking the individuals from the childhood analysis, and those who have done exercises at the childhood and those who have not done the exercise at the childhood has to be taken sample survey, and after becoming adults you have to analyze them, how whether they become obese or not. This is what. So it is not a 1 month or 1 year analysis. It is going to be a long analysis, no more than around 20 years analysis it must be. This is a long study analysis.
This is a long study. I agree. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes,
let's think about this. So it could be the case that children who are already healthy exercise more, and the children who are not healthy are exercising less. So the fact that there's obesity is driven by the fact that children who are already healthy are exercising more, and children who are not healthy are. So there is a causality problem. Is it the health at the childhood level that's driving the adult obesity? Or is it the fact that health is either preventing or helping the child to exercise? So how did this research study actually test this?
it is not exercise alone, it is nutritional factors also.
Is a lot of factors.
A lot of factors are there.
Yeah.
Because it is to be made as a big analysis from the beginning.
Exactly. So you control for all these other factors.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Right. So after
Yes.
controlling for these other factors, the question is, does childhood exercise, what is the causality? Is it coming from the health, the initial health, or is it coming from the fact that this health is helping somebody exercise or not exercise? So the way they did it is, let's look at something exogenous that prevents exercise,
Yes.
right? So they said, okay, let's look at different cities. In one city, there's a lot of rainfall during the day. In another city, there's not. And if there's a lot of rainfall during the day, the children don't go out and play.
Yes.
So if children don't go out and play, this reduces childhood exercise, and this reduces,
Yes.
this increases adult obesity. So the way they separated, they got this causality to work with childhood exercise is to say, look, let us now use something exogenous that does not have an impact on underlying health, but it has an impact only on the fact that children exercise or not. And let's use that to study the health outcomes. Okay, another last hypothesis, and I think this is quite interesting. So there's a hypothesis, somebody actually tested this. Do parents live longer? Right? So people who have children, do they live longer? Again, this is a valid question to ask. How would you go about testing this?
It is actually a futuristic, what I can say, philosophy of the children and people. Actually, do parents live longer, or whether they survive short age, or it is a philosophy, life philosophy, human philosophy actually.
Agreed,
So it
but
links
can we
to the
test this?
philosophy.
Can we test this? That's a good point, Professor Sambhavisa, but can we test this?
We can test. Why? Because basing on the nutritional habits and physical habits and other psychological habits, this can be tested. If those parameters are very good, maintained, the nutritional, physical, and psychological aspects too. Because if the parents are having very good nutrition, very good exercise, but psychologically if they are depressive, they cannot live longer. So these three has to be tested very nicely. Then only that can be tested easily.
Yeah, very good point. So let me tell you how they did it. Right, one way to do it is look at people with children, look at people without children,
Yes.
Control for the other factors, like you're talking about the nutritional, psychology, all those factors, we control for that.
Yes.
Now, let's see, do people with children, do they live longer than people without children, right? That would be a very obvious way to test this, except that
Yes.
people who are likely to live longer, they may be the ones who may have children. And the people who are less likely to live longer because they have a family history or whatever, they may be less likely to
Actually,
have children.
there itself you got a point, no? Because when the children are not there, they are depressive or psychologically going for depression. There itself answer is there.
I'm not sure. You
Disturbed.
talk to
Yes, yes.
parents of teenagers. Maybe that's the people with teenagers are more depressed. Who don't
It's a
actually.
big subject topic actually.
Exactly. A very simple question, but very big subject. So remember, the causality is hard. If you
Yes,
just look at
Yes.
people with children, people without children, and try to look at how long they live, right? That is, you're missing the causality. Is it
Yes.
that people who expect to live longer have children, or people who don't expect to live longer don't have children, right? So what's causing this? So the way this particular research was done is they looked at families that went for IVF, for fertility treatments. And among this group that went for fertility treatments, some of them were successful in having children, some of them were not successful having children, right? And then they looked at people who were successful versus not successful, because all of them wanted children, right? So all of them initially thought, yes, we want children. It's not the differences in wanting children that's driving the results. So all of them wanted children. Some of them did, some of them did not. And the people who did lived longer. So what this is telling you is there's something about having children that makes you live longer. Maybe you take less risk as parents. Maybe you are more safe. You don't go bungee jumping or parachuting, right? Maybe these are the things that drive longevity in parents. But anyway, these are the kinds of questions, and you got to, the thing about economics is you got to think very carefully about how you design your
I understand
tests and
your
experiments.
philosophy that hypothesis has to be made first and it has to be tested.
Yes.
That's
And
what-
how do you test it? How do you design the test?
experiments for that. So you are giving very good
Exactly.
idea for young children, young researchers, how to test the hypothesis and how to frame the hypothesis and how to test it actually.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right, Professor Samavisa. That's exactly what I was trying to point out. And
Yes,
there
sir.
are very interesting studies out there.
Yes, sir.
Lots of, and simple question that you think, oh, of course you can do this and that's the answer. But no, you got to
Yes.
think really deeply, and that's what economics helps you do.
Yes.
So anyway, this is where I wanted to end. I wanted to leave you with this idea of economics research, and I hope that I see more students from India applying to PhD programs in the US.
Yes, we will encourage, sir. Whenever you
Yeah.
get opportunity of any positions in economics research, you send me information. I will circulate to my students that some opportunities of scholarships or fellowships. I will definitely circulate.
So I should tell you, in
Yes,
the
sir.
US,
Yes,
all universities,
yes.
at least the finance departments I know, and many economics departments, they offer scholarships and fellowships for coming and doing a PhD.
I know. I am in Emory for 6 months.
Oh, you were?
I'm in Emory School of Medicine during 1999 and 2000 June. I am there. 99 November
Okay.
to June. I'm in Emory Medical School in biochemistry.
Ah,
I
small world.
worked in a BA Medical Center DNA sequencing facility. I worked there in Emory.
Oh,
Medical
boy.
School. Dr. Giri, Dr. Giri. I worked with him.
I
Giri
see, I see.
Polavarpu. Dr. Giri Polavarpu, I worked with him. He was in CDC and also in Emory biochemistry. During 99, 2000, he must be not there because it's
Yeah.
very long back.
Yeah.
So I was there 6 months in Emory. I was staying just near the VIA Medical Center.
Okay, I live pretty close there also.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So
I remember
there are
that
lots of opportunities.
I enjoyed the Atlanta stay that time.
Oh, yeah. So I want people to be, but it takes, so a PhD takes 6 years, 7 years. It's a long, hard process.
No,
right?
actually,
But I encourage people to do it.
no, the reason for inviting you, because I know Emory is one of the top schools in the country, US. It is top 20 universities Emory comes. So that's the reason why I invited you from Emory to our faculty and also staff. We have one more professor from our economics department, Professor Chana. He was also our finance officer in university. He joined late. He was also there. And also we have one Professor Sivaram from NIRD, National Institute of Rural Development, Hyderabad. He is also there in panelists. So there are many questions. No, I think Lafi can take up from the young, even some questions were posted
Let's do
in
that.
chat box. Let them first answer that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Tarun. Thank you for providing us an insightful knowledge on the basic concepts of economics. And I would like to inform you, sir, that all the branches of economics, from macro to micro, from econometrics to statistics, they are all included in the MZU Mizoram University MA syllabus. And I'm
Okay.
glad that 98 of our students are here.
Okay.
And I hope they'll have some questions. And
So
may I
let me
invite,
just say one
yes,
thing, Lavi. Let me just say one thing to the students, right? All
Yes,
US programs offer scholarships and fellowships to qualified students, right? So
Right.
please apply. There are lots and lots of opportunities here. Like,
yes.
and the economic environment, the atmosphere of working is very professional, right? So I would urge people to apply to PhD programs. But keep in mind, it's a very hard, long process, and it's very hard to get. We get about 50 applications for 2 spots, 70 applications for 2 spots. So it's very hard. So you have to prepare yourself before you can be considered. It's hard, but it is rewarding. Keep that in mind. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. With that, may I invite Professor Giri Babu to take up the questions?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your very informative and enlightening us. Sir, now I will start with question hours. I think we have some around 12 questions.
Okay.
Sir, I think now Professor Vasala Babu Rao is asking what shall be the status of BPL, mainly you can say like middle class in India in the post-COVID era. So how we can eradicate the poverty in India once? And yes, sir. One, I think you can say scholar, they're asking, what are the currently interesting research topics in the field of behavioral finance operating in security markets?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So let's start with the BP below poverty line and middle class. So first of all, let me be clear. This is not my expertise of research, but I can just make informed guesses in terms of, see, I showed you that graph. How can poor countries become rich, right? I showed you that table. What are the big differences between poor and rich countries? One of the big things that we have not talked about in economics is the political environment, right? So think about in many poor countries. I'm going to look at the extreme examples. Let's look at Zimbabwe. Let's look at Sweden, right? The Scandinavian countries. Why is there such a difference in the standard of living and quality of life between these two sets of countries, right? In Zimbabwe, the political system has been completely destroyed. And in Sweden, things work, right? The prime minister will take the train to work, right? The prime minister is part of the people. It is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. And that's absolutely true. In Zimbabwe, it's a group of people trying to control the resources at the expense of everybody else. So because the political system has broken down, and I think that's a first order consideration. So that is the extreme difference between poor and rich countries. And then you come to levels of, so why is the US a rich country? One reason, it has got a lot of resources. But more important, it is actually using those resources well, right? So there are lots of countries that have excellent resources, right? If you look at the Middle Eastern countries, they have oil. They've had oil for so long, but their governance is a complete mess, right? Few people are trying to hold on to everything. In a democratic capitalist society, you have to bring everybody along, right? You have to have healthcare for everybody. You have to have opportunities for everybody, equal opportunities. You have to provide very reasonable tax environment. So lots of different things that need to go right. In terms of India, in the post-COVID area, the below poverty line and middle class, right? I have read that the poor people have been really hard hit in India because jobs have been lost. And in fact, I'm getting requests for donations all the time, and I've been donating a lot of money because things are so bad in India. There are no jobs, people can't go to work, things are in lockdown. And there's a big worry that the middle class may also fall down into the into poverty. Right? There's a big concern because I know we have family members who had jobs and now they're working half, or they've lost the job. Somebody's lost the job. So it is really hard. And I don't know how India is going to come out of this. Hopefully, we tend to blame the government, but at the same time, I was in India about a month ago. People were not wearing masks. People were not doing social distancing. There are lots of issues that we have to take personal responsibility that we were not. And that was a concern. But at the same time, when I think of this government, I think we could have avoided the Kumbh Mela, for instance. We could have avoided the election rallies. But what they're doing now is they're saying, look, we cannot control it. People are going to get it. Let's get over this fast so that herd immunity will come. I think that's one strategy. See, again, these are questions you got to think about. In a rich country, you lock down, you try to force people to stay at home. In poor countries, if you do that, it affects the jobs and livelihoods of people. And that can have a huge impact, and it's having a huge impact in India. Right? So you have to be very careful when you decide on lockdown in a poor country versus a rich country. Right? And these are the decisions that policymakers have to think about carefully. What is my opinion about free money to people? Well, that's what's happening a lot in the US. A lot of free money is being given out, and it is reducing the incentives for people to work. That's why in the US today, businesses are not able to find people, even though 8 million people, fewer people are employed than before COVID. Right? So again, you have to think about these things very carefully. To what extent can government and central bank influence the microeconomy? What are the problem thesis, the field of economics and financial situations? Yeah, central banks, we think about them as mainly the macroeconomy. But if right now in the US, there's so much money being created. The central bank asset base has gone to $7 trillion. Right? That's huge, $7 trillion. That's the highest it's ever been. That means they have been printing a lot of money. They've been creating. But what this does is probably make it easier for governments to finance deficits, and for fiscal spending, that will have an impact on the microeconomy. So the micro are sort of linked, but the central bank is just dealing with monetary supply, monetary policy. The governments are involved in fiscal, but governments might spend more if it's cheaper to do so, and that's what's happening in the US right now. What are the problem thesis proposal field of economics financial situation? If you meet any two economists, people will differ, people will argue, they have different opinions, right? It's always the case. So they can always find problems with any study. The question is, on the whole, do you believe the research or not, right? Does it conform to what you observe in the data, right? So yeah, any study will have problems. Even the famous Black-Scholes pricing of derivatives of options was first rejected, right? It's been a really pioneering work, but it was first rejected. Some Indian states have enormous alcoholic income. Yeah. Should we tax alcohol more? I think so. Alcohol and tobacco, it has health outcomes. We should tax them more. But at the same time, this may be pretty much the only entertainment that a lot of people have, and we got to worry about that. But at the same time, I agree. Alcohol, guns, tobacco, we should tax them for sure. This could help future. Yeah, I agree. We should tax these because it has impact at the level of the family, right? It's serious consequences. What type of economy would save the poorest countries? Venezuela, Sudan. Yeah. See, the inflation is just an outcome. So if you look at Venezuela, what's happening there? There's an illegitimate government that's holding on to power. Same thing in Sudan, right? Same thing in Zimbabwe. The problem is political governance, right? So in the US, Trump lost an election and he had to leave, regardless of what he claimed. So you have to have these institutions in place. You have to have this democracy. You have to have an educated population. You have to have a lot of these things to work, right? So inflation is just an outcome of the underlying problems, right? So what type of economy could save the poorest countries? Well, just change the leadership, have a proper political system, term limits. What is your opinion on happiness index? So this is a very good question. Happiness is what, at the end of the day, we should care about, right? The problem is we cannot measure happiness, at least not in an objective manner, which is why we measure things like GDP growth. We measure things like maternal health, like child poverty. We measure those things, the millennium goals that I talked about, right? We measure those because we cannot measure happiness. Hopefully those are related to happiness. There has been research where there have been surveys on happiness, right? You ask people, are you happy? So the happiest countries in the world, like Finland is the happiest country in the world. And I had actually gone to Finland for a research seminar. And I was asking them, why is Finland so happy? It's dark 6 months of the year. And they're saying, actually, it is true. It's happy. The question is, where do you take the surveys? If you go to a bar and ask people, are you happy? The guy is drinking. Yeah, of course I'm happy. Give me some more beer. I'll be happier. Right? So that's one reason.
So
India's
Finland is Mizoram, sir.
Finland, Mizoram.
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
Finland is Mizoram.
I will have to visit.
Yes,
Please.
you have to come, sir. Whenever you come to India, you please let us know. No, India, Mizoram people are very happy. No, always their happy
That's
index
good to
is
know.
very high.
So the other thing, when I was in Finland, the other thing they told me is they have these long winters. It's dark. They have a lot of suicides.
Yes.
So I was thinking, but then the question, what this guy was jokingly telling me, again, he's a professor at Aalto University in Finland. He was telling me, okay, yeah, suicides are high, and the people who are left are happy. So maybe that's why it's a biased measure of happiness. So again, happiness is very subjective and very hard. So in fact, one of my neighbors some years ago was a neuroscientist. And he was saying that they're trying to measure happiness by putting electrodes on the brain and trying to see what impact in the fMRI machines, what impact certain stimuli have to certain centers and where they can correlate with happiness. So they're trying to objectively measure happiness, but it is hard at the level of a country. Statement that resources on this planet and beyond relation to human wants are scarce, but are sufficient modern day problems like knowledge, capacity, ability are not enough. Yeah, I agree. Knowledge, capacity, ability are not enough, but you'd be surprised of how much we actually know. The problem is the dissemination of knowledge. And that's what we need more PhD students, more faculty, more academia to do this. We have the knowledge, we have the capacity, I think we have the ability. The problem is governance, right? Let me give you a simple example. We know that climate change is a problem, right? Think about what will happen to India in case the glaciers, the Himalayan glaciers melt, right? If the Ganges is dry, think about what that do to food security in India, right? We know all about this. We know that we have to control our carbon emissions. We have, and in fact, the UN report, they said that in about 150 to 200 years, the Himalayan glaciers will melt if we continue in the current path. We know the problems that are coming. How do we solve that, right? Humans, as they want to free ride, that's the problem. right? Most countries will say, okay, let that other country do the work. Why should I? We will say, oh, let our neighbor spend the money to reduce climate. Why should I? Right? That's a very human tendency. And these are the problems that we have to solve. Because in terms of reducing carbon, yes, we should have a carbon tax. We should increase the cost of pollution. Right? There are things that we know as economists. But in the political system, it's very hard to implement. Even in the US, it's hard to do these things. Even when the population is educated. I think now there is going to be some movement along that direction, but still it's hard. What is the relevance of bid-ask spread marketing prior to 70s? Traditional economy was in vogue.
Sir,
Okay, I'm not
if I may, can you
sure.
please take up the previous one about resources on this planet and beyond? It's from our student, MA Economics, Lalram Moya. If you can
Yeah,
take that.
so
Yes, please.
yeah, that's what I was saying. We have the knowledge, capacity, and the ability. The problem is being able to take the political decisions that we need to. Right? I agree. For example, in 1 hour, the solar energy that reaches Earth, that is enough to power Earth for the whole year. The question is, can we harness this energy? What is the cost of harnessing this energy? Right? There are lots of technological things that have to be in place. The problem is this is expensive, right? Who pays for this research? How do we harness solar energy? How do we harness wind power, right? It is happening, but it's a slow process. It can be, the speed of this can be increased if we impose taxes on carbon, which is not being done, right? The political will is not there, unfortunately. And it has to be done around the world, right? If no country wants to do it by itself and impose cost on itself, because there'll be a competitive advantage to other countries. So no country wants to do it, which is why we have this Paris, these meetings at a global level, but it's not being done. And that's the problem. Okay, what is the relevance of bid-ask spreads marketing prior to 1970s? Okay, I'm not sure I understand this question. Bid-ask spread marketing. See, when I think of bid-ask spreads in the market, so this bid-ask spreads, when I think about buying and selling of stocks, right? There's a bid price, there's an ask price. The market makers are providing this, and people are trading at the bid and the ask, right? There's some very interesting questions behind this, and how large or how small this bid-ask spread is going to decide how liquid the market is, right? That's the context in which I was thinking. So I don't know about the marketing prior to 70s. I'm not aware of this. Okay, intake many times like a child could control obesity. Oh yeah, child, yeah. For example, sugary drinks, Coke and Thumbs Up and all this. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. But the question is, how do you study child obesity, for example? Suggest a name, book name for financial economics. You know, there are these books which says a very short introduction to microeconomics, a very short introduction to macroeconomics, a very short introduction to financial economics. They're very these short books that you can read relatively quickly, and they provide a lot of information, right? So look up these books, and if you want to look up research that's happening right today, there is a site called ssrn.com, Social Services Research Network, ssrn.com. So you can search for people who are doing research, right? If you go to ssrn.com and search for Nobel laureates, I'm not like Schiller, for example, right? He might have papers, I don't know. Or Raghu Rajan. Go there and search for Raghu Rajan. S as in Sam, S as in Sam, R as in Russia, N as in Nagpur.com, right? If you go to this website, and there's lots of research in lots of different fields, right? And you can search for people, search for research topics, search for work in different areas that's taking place, right? There's lots of stuff happening. Experimental research just addressed by professor in his lecture. Okay, what is the question? Okay, let me go.
I
Sorry?
think you may skip that, sir. There's no question
Yeah.
there.
It's not a
Question is
What are
not
the
there.
job opportunities? Oh, the job opportunities are huge. See, commerce, like accounting, is very specialized, and there are lots of job opportunities in accounting, no doubt. Economics, yes, there are opportunities, right? They're forecasting. There is, like the World Bank, they have economists. The IMF has economists. There are companies that will have economists. There are academics, right? There are lots and lots of jobs. But you got to, it's a different way of thinking. It's a different training you get, right? So, for example, there are lots of opportunities for computer science, for data scientists today, in biotechnology. That these fields are just exploding, right? There's research going on self-driving cars. So there are a lot of requirements for that kind of research, right? Data and computer science. There's research going on in biotechnology, in stem cell research. There's lots of stuff going on. There's demand everywhere, right? If you're good, you will find a job. That's not an issue. How can we provide more employment in the private sector? Same perks and benefits of the public sector. Yeah, the jobs will, see, I think most of the problems in most of the developing world is the government, right? If you get the government out of the picture, things will actually be better. The government actually hinders in the developing world. So if you let a free competitive market to work, there'll be lots of job opportunities. But even today, in most developing countries, the multinationals provide good jobs. No economic planning in India. How will achieve social equality? Yeah, right. See, in India, let me give you an example of India. Right, I traveled in India. I use Air India if it's convenient. Air India is so hard to use. You go to the website of any airline, Delta Airlines or United or American, and try to use the website of Air India. The website is just hard to use. It's hard to deal. See, anytime the government gets involved, it's just they make a mess of things, right? If you so because the incentives of bureaucrats are very different, right? It's to provide jobs rather than to provide customer service, right? If you travel on Indigo, it's much better than traveling on India or on Air India, right? And Air India is losing so much money, right? That's money going away that could be spent on healthcare, on education, on hospitals, right? So you've got to think about reducing the government interference actually in most developing countries. My research area is financial market, financial economics from the beginning. Yeah, great idea. There's lots of work going on in financial markets, right? Market microstructure. We just had a conference in New York on market microstructure. There's a lot of stuff going on at the frontier. Again, there's huge literature. You got to spend 5, 6, 7 years in a PhD programs to get caught up to where things are. How to help governments which are caught between good economics versus good politics.
If I may intervene, that is Professor NVR Jyoti Kumar, Head, Department of Commerce Department, sir.
Okay. Hi, Jyoti. How to help governments caught between good economics versus good politics. Good politics and good economics go hand to hand. Think about Sweden, think about Finland, think about these countries, right? Both of they work hand in hand, because if there's a good government that actually cares about the people, it'll go together. It'll happen, and it is happening. There is evidence of that. The problem is when people want to hold on to power, when people do not care about the public and they want to get rich themselves. That's where the problems occur, and that's why you need institutions in place to prevent this from happening, like term limits, like age limits and things like that for politicians. Can you share idea, thought regarding farmers' law? Okay, I really don't know the farmers' law. I have not studied this in detail, but what I know is there's a lot of subsidy that's paid to farmers if that around the world. And what the US has done is, instead of giving subsidies for growing farm, they give subsidies to manage the land. So there are ways to organize this. I don't know how, what the political situation is in India. I haven't really paid attention to this, so I can't talk to this.
So I have one more question.
Yeah.
Sir, how and why when stock market indices shows an upward trend, even when the economy of the country is showing no sign of growth?
Yeah. See, remember, we saw this in the US right in the middle of COVID in April, May of last year, right? So what happened is the government was pumping a lot of money. The central bank, the Federal Reserve, was pumping a lot of money into the economy, right? They wanted to make interest rates really low. So there are lots of different drivers of stock prices, right? If you pump a lot of money into the system, interest rates are falling. That means the one of the models of pricing companies is, okay, these are their future cash flows. You've got to discount them back to the present. And if you're discounting them at a lower rate, the value will be higher, right? So that could be just the fact that you're pumping money, even though the company is not, how it's doing is not changed. Maybe it's actually doing worse, but you're pumping so much money, the money has to go somewhere, and it goes into the stock market, goes into real estate, it goes into gold, and all those prices start going up. The other thing is, for a long time, I don't if you have followed Amazon or not, for number of years, Amazon was losing money, but people were seeing that it was growing at a very tremendous rate, right? Then the point was that at some future point, it would start paying dividends, it would start paying back the shareholders. And that kept the price going up. And today, Amazon is worth what, $1.7 trillion or something. This company, which started 20, 25 years ago, right? Again, it's future growth, the future expectation of future growth that can increase valuation, or the cost of capital. If the cost of capital goes down, that can increase valuation. There are lots of things go into valuing companies. And again, we talk about this in financial economics, in asset pricing.
So one student again is asking, so during this COVID pandemic, does the economic globalization have any significant impact on the development of international financial system?
Yeah, so there are right now a lot of governments, IMF and World Bank, they're talking about helping the poor countries because of huge budget deficits, right? So there have been discussions. So yeah, people are talking about, or globalization, right? Products are sourced from so many different places, right? The globalization broke down in COVID because flights are not taking, people are not. People are thinking of moving the production in-house. That it's a very big question. There are lots of so many different aspects to this, and yeah, I haven't thought that deeply about it. But if you sit down and think about it, there are lots of different things to come. And there's one more question: impact of overpopulation in developing countries like India. See, you've got to be very careful. The population density in India is high, but it's not the highest. The highest density of population is in countries like Belgium or Japan, right? So how are they managing high growth versus India, right? The reason is they have good political governance, they have good institutions in place, they have good property rights in place, and they have an educated population, healthy population that is concerned, that is actually productive in terms of work and education and health and all these other things. It's a very complicated issue. It's very easy to say, oh, overpopulation is causing a problem. I'm not sure. If you can educate everybody, you'll have a very different outcome. If you can create a society that has a culture of trust, you'll have a very different outcome, right? All these things play together. Putting your finger on just overpopulation is not an answer, because there are countries, like I said, that have a higher population density than India and are doing much better. But like take Singapore. Singapore has zero resources. They're among the richest countries in the world. They have a per capita GDP of like $85,000. US has a per capita GDP of $60,000. And Singapore has zero resources. But it's a very internally competitive society. Right? And they don't waste money, and the governance is fantastic. So I actually taught a class in Singapore about 10 years ago, right? And I had to get a work permit. So I had to go and deal with the government and government officials to get a work permit. It took 5 minutes to get a work permit. If in India I had tried to do this deal with the government, it would have taken 3 months and nothing would have happened. And the guy would have been asking bribes and stuff. So those are the issues. Those are the issues you got to think about. Right? India needs to think about real estate laws, labor laws, right? Healthcare, basic stuff. If you get this basic stuff right, it'll have a big impact. Right? And there are really smart people like Raghu Rajan. We know what's got to be done. The problem is you need to have political will to get this done. But anyway, I think at this point we should end. It's 9:06. It's late for you guys also.
Yes.
So it's not 9, sir. It is only 6:40. Evening.
Yes.
Yeah, for me it's 9 o'clock. We started at 7:30.
So we will, sir, we will ask the online. There are Professor Vanlal and Professor Vice Chancellor from Karnataka University and Professor Sriram. They have any questions specific, they can interact, and finally we can close, sir. Professor Chonna and Professor Sharnappa, Vice Chancellor Karnataka, you have any questions, you can ask now.
No questions,
Sir,
sir. I'm science graduate, electronic. Basically, I'm electronics man. Okay.
Yeah.
It is good, sir.
Yeah, good evening, sir. This is
Thank you.
Shivaram.
Hi,
Yeah,
Shivam.
yeah. I want to ask you a small question. Professor Tarun, actually, can you highlight 1 or 2 points on SDGs in the context of development economics, in the context of India? Just 1 or 2 sentences. Thank you so much.
So there's research happening in development economics in India, right? The Indian School of Business, they have a department of economics, and they are doing research on, like, for example, I was in ISB a few years back, and there was a research paper talking about, how do we increase participation in schools? So one government has given money for food lunch to students, right? But the question is that food being actually delivered to students on the ground? So they had a program where the parents can, or maybe a government official can actually call in and ask, okay, what was served today? What was the food? So you need monitoring. So there is research going on in India in development economics today. There are really good people. The question is, at the top, at the leadership level, we need people to get really involved in worrying about these things, right? There are good people everywhere, but the political will has to be there. If the political leadership is not concerned about their power and their wealth, and they're willing to actually do something, a lot can be done. But anyway, I'm moving away from these.
Yeah,
subjects.
thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Sir, you hear me?
Yes. Professor
Okay. Nice to hear your very beautiful lecture, I should say. All
thank you.
important. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm so happy to be able a part of the participant in this. So one question I have. Here in India, we have seen COVID second wave is hitting our economy like anything. But at the same time, our stock market is seems like immune to what is happening in the real economy. How will we explain? Should I believe stock market is a good indicator of economic welfare of the people? So I am totally lost faith in financial economics.
Yeah, good question. right? So you got to be very careful. If you look at India's GDP, what fraction is on the stock market,
Yes.
right? So
Yes, sir.
is
Yes,
it
sir.
representative of the total GDP? One. Two, like I was saying, the stock market reacts to a lot of different inputs, right? How much money is being pumped into the system? What are the cost of capital? Has that gone down? Is the government handing out money? Like in the US, this was happening and the stock market kept going up and it was hard to understand why. So I've done research on US markets. I've not worked on Indian markets, but the same problem exists everywhere. People are saying, oh, I don't understand why this is happening in the markets when the economy is not doing well. Well, there are always pockets of the economy that does well. So in the US, let me give you an example. Over the last 10 years, it is 4 or 5 companies that have been driving the market, right? So what are these companies? Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, right? These Netflix, these 4 or 5 companies, 5 or 6, they're driving the market. So you can't just look, and these companies have done well. They've done really well during COVID also, right? Because everything is on Zoom and everything is online and ordering is online. So everything is happening online. But you can't take these few companies and make a decision about the entire economy, right? It's good. Yeah, these companies are doing well. They are actually providing services that people want. People want phones. People want online services. So all this is happening, right? Agreed. But what about the people working at a restaurant, a person? Restaurant business is hurting a lot, right? What about the travel industry? What about the hospitality industry? What about the hotel industry, right? All those are hurting. So if you look at sectors of the market, even in the stock market, these sectors are hurting. Other sectors are doing well. But we can't just focus on the well-doing sectors, but you got to worry about employment. You got to worry about overall welfare. So again, you have to be careful. The stock market tells you something, but it doesn't give you the full picture. Plus, there are lots of other things that drive the stock market. Inflation fears. Like price of gold has gone up. Why? Because there's fear of inflation. Right? Okay. Lots of things to think about.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Tarun Chaudia. May I invite our VC if there's anything more to say, sir, from your side?
I think we thank him personally and also because it is a wonderful lecture. I just wanted to say last concluding points for me, and after that you can go for a vote of thanks. It was really wonderful. People, several insights we got into economic studies and many issues you have discussed openly, and all our participants interacted very nicely. So I thank you very much, Professor Tarun, for your kind interaction with us. And only request I can make you is whenever you get opportunity, kindly consider our Mizoram University for giving opportunity to our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rao. Thank you.
With
Thanks
that,
for the opportunity.
yes, sir. With that, may I invite Professor Giri Babu to propose a vote of thanks?
So thank you. So good evening to everyone. Respected Chairperson, Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir, eminent speaker, faculties, scholars, students, and ladies and gentlemen. I am Professor Giri Babu. This is my proud privilege and a great joy for me to extend my vote of thanks. On behalf of our organizing committee and my own behalf, I express our sincere gratitude to our Vice Chancellor, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, for giving this opportunity to organize this webinar and inviting speakers for today's lecture, having a fruitful discussion. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. We take this opportunity to extend our gratitude to the distinguished speaker, Professor Tarun Chaudia, Professor of Finance. So, Emory University, Gazuta Business School, USA, for enlightening us with your knowledge and proficiency. So today's lecture was full of informative and interesting, and it gave deep insights into the topic and also revealed some interesting facts. The point where Professor told us about the economic reasons in various fields was really informative, and I'm pretty sure the precious knowledge that Professor gave us will definitely help us in our students as well as scholars. So once again, I would like to thank Professor Tarun Chodia for taking out time for his busy schedule and enlightening us with his knowledge.
Thank you,
Thanks. I would
Professor
like-
Giribabu. Oh, sorry.
I would also like to thank organized secretaries, faculty members, research scholars, students, and other participants within and outside Mizoram present here for paying your attention and learning. Thank you so much. We wish to place on record our heartfelt thanks to our ICT and other technical staff, Mizoram University, who has contributed in one way or other to make this event grand success. Thank you all once again. Stay safe and stay healthy. Namaste. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Greater
sir.
days remain. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Take care.
Thank you.
And bye.